Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's Ask the Expert. The Community Association here in Chestnut Hill is very happy to be once again partnering with the Chestnut Hill Conservancy on this event, especially because the majority of the heavy lifting is done by a committee of the Conservancy. And so we are very happy to help present it and to be part of it any way we can. I do just to let people know that we're very excited that next Wednesday we will be releasing virtually a garden tour of Chestnut Hill and Mount Airy that has been in production now for a couple of months, and it's sort of our gift to the community, so it's a free thing. And so you'll see an ad in the local with the link to the tour, and I hope everybody enjoys it.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I'm Jean McCoubry, and I will introduce the Conservancy, even though we have in attendance our Executive Director, Lori, and Operations Director, Leah, who are very qualified to do so. I'm a board member and co-chair with Susan Peck, who is also in attendance, of the Program Committee of the Conservancy. Just a little background, most of you probably know this already, but the Conservancy used to be called Chestnut Hill Historical Society, and it was started in 1967. It's a threefold mission of preservation, conservation, and archives. So the organization is devoted to advocating for and educating about historic building preservation, open space conservation, and also preservation of social history through the archives, etc. We would love to have all of you become members of the Conservancy, and whether or not you choose to join the Conservancy, everyone is always welcome to help us design these series of programs. This is Ask the Experts, but we also have, in normal years, we have some talks and tours called Discovering Chestnut Hill. The staff has done an amazing job since the pandemic broke out of offering lots of content online. If you go to the Conservancy website and or sign up to be on the list so that you'll get the History at Home email blast every week. Lots of great content in there and things to do. So we hope to get back on board with in-person events as soon as we can, but meanwhile you can keep yourselves busy with that. For this particular presentation, we're aiming to end by 9 o'clock because there's some national programming that some people might want to tune into. And meanwhile, Hal would like to introduce himself, or Hal, I have your resume in hand if you'd rather have me do that. And by the way, I will monitor the chat room, but Hal, please let us know if you're perfectly happy having people chime in and let us interrupt you as you talk. It's up to you.
Yes, please interrupt. I think I was telling either Jean or Leah I'm a couple days back from vacation, so you know how that weird transition is. One thing I've noticed, I've done very little Zoom, so I'm better off if I don't make eye contact, but I realize no one's going to know the difference anyway. But if I'm just looking off in the distance, obviously I'm not ignoring you, but I just communicate better because my brain wants to make eye contact and then it all falls apart. So yes, I would like a good hearty back and forth. You can ask me the regular questions about spotted lanternfly, or we can go deep in terms of the meaning of the urban forest and the future of mankind, all within the next 57 minutes. Yeah, so I'm basically a career arborist. The Midwestern twang is from growing up in Metro Chicago and Chicago. But I moved here in 1980 and started work with the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society, Ernesta Ballard, Jane Pepper era. And that was with Philadelphia Green. Got a great intro to urban forestry in terms of community organizing and getting not only trees planted, but developing vacant lots for community vegetable gardens and what we called sitting gardens. Great intro to the city. It was a much different city back in 1980. And had already begun as an arborist because when I was 16 years old, OSHA allowed 16-year-olds to climb trees and work for tree care companies. And as it so happened, I was a high school kid in Evanston, Illinois. My grandparents had a business that serviced Chicago's North Shore in Glenview, Illinois. My grandfather was kind of a straight shooter patriarch, successful businessman, and his company was the care of trees. And I remember he called me, this is a romanticized, exaggerated story, but he called me, you know, 3 weeks before high school baseball and said, when's your spring break? Oh, hi, Grandpa, it's April 21. He said, well, you can start working for the company then. So spring break out the window, and getting to be the boss's grandson, learning to climb trees, which was a completely different early stages of how we took care of trees. And primarily I'm thinking about the equipment we used: no bucket truck, no chippers, 38-foot ladders, all kinds of things that we did then that are horrifically unsafe, but here I am today. After the Horticulture Society, I started work for Bartlett Tree Experts, and I was in sales and did some marketing for them for about 15 years. And I've been with Shechtman for the last 11. And one thing Grandpa did impress upon me, and I did take it to heart as an arborist. And you know, I think with most of the things we do professionally, is there is no such thing as a tree expert. I sat in on a workshop the day before yesterday that was coming out of the University of Washington, and heard scientists talk, and I thought, you know, they're almost speaking a different language. I think I'm understanding about 60% of what they say. So I like to think I like keeping it fresh, and I like sharing that information with people as much as possible. The more recent narrative, I talked to Jean at length about this, is attending a couple workshops, one in 2018 and one in 2019. 2018 was a workshop in Toronto that was called The Urban Forest of Tomorrow. And it was truly international, and it was truly tremendous. A very different arborist convention than what we have in the States, in that it brought in so many urban foresters and scientists from around the world, the UK, the Netherlands, Spain, Canada, and the US. So it was, you know, the classic paradigm shift, and learned a lot of things, particularly the people working on the forefront of trees and climate change. The second one I attended in 2019 was the Climate Reality Leadership Conference down in Atlanta. So that was 3 days, and that was, you know, the NASA scientists, along with starting to hear for the first time about climate equity and the true science-based reality of what these rising temperatures and changing weather systems mean for us, not only in the Delaware Valley, of course, but worldwide. So paradigm shift continues. I'll show you some images that Leah helped me with, but it made me realize that as an arborist professional, all these years, 30, 40 years, we're very involved with pruning dead limbs, fertilizing, killing spotted lanternfly. But when it comes to the day that we take that tulip poplar down that got ripped over by a derecho, or the diseased oak with bacterial leaf scorch, or the ash with emerald ash borer, we're not, from a business standpoint, we're not keeping a strong enough focus on staying in touch with the client and getting new trees planted. So I think I'm gonna kind of leave it at that as far as my introduction. I don't claim to be a weather expert. I realize I am slowly learning it, the science of it, understanding a little bit about a derecho. I've heard it called a sideways tornado. I've heard it called a Midwestern hurricane. And these all kind of make sense. We've had the usual 2 or 3 pretty severe weather systems come in. And yeah, so if I could just put that next slide up, Leah. So just let's look at happy, healthy trees. Obviously, this is not the Delaware Valley. Just a couple vacation pictures of up in the Finger Lakes last week, and was very humbled and overwhelmed with nostalgic reverie to see healthy trees like the ones that we're seeing here. That is cockspur hawthorn. And I don't want to, go deep on species and stuff. We started with a few pictures of the good old Betula papyrifera, the white bark birch. And I know, 15, 20 years ago, these were prevalent in the landscape. Bronze birch borer was a pest that we could control. But we're looking at species, particularly with this birch, that just packed it in. Hot, humid, dry weather is not what birch is like. If you go 275 miles north, it's a little cooler, a little bit more regular precipitation, and just, yeah, I will be an arborist nerd for a minute and expand the palette of the trees I saw up there. That it was like saying hello to old friends. There was American linden throughout the woods. There was sugar maple throughout the woods. The native hornbeam or musclewood or ironwood, and hop hornbeam. So just great to see, healthy woods. And it just made me realize, down here, Metro Philly, we're up against some pretty challenging situations with a older tree population, and at the same time, species starting to fade out. And then this is Austrian pine. And this is another one that we used to be able to treat it. It did give us some issues with a fungal tip blight called diplodia, but more often than not, they were healthy and vigorous and green, and we've lost them. The only ones I see now are the outliers, deep in someone's backyard. Same with those native paperbark birch. You only see the outliers that happen to be in a odd location where it's heavily shaded, and you know, but they're still getting enough sunshine and resources. So one term that's, see if I can put my hands on it, because they were talking about it the other day, that we're now dealing with species that are moving up from the south. So people are always asking me, you know, what kind of tree should I plant when we have that replacement discussion? They say, I really like red buds. And I like red buds too. You know, I have a couple small ones at my house, but kind of case in point that we're losing some of these delicate tree types, and at the same time starting to anticipate that trees further south, and that would be, you know, going into the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area, are now starting to have a little bit more success growing around here. I haven't seen a lot of it. I do know that the Morris Arboretum has a stand of live oak that they're growing over at Bloomfield Farm, and it's doing quite well. So as we lose northern red oak, as we lose pin oak to bacterial leaf scorch, you know, I guess the hopeful thing is that we're going to get a new round of advancing species. You know, and I guess the other example I can give you is like the fig that's growing in my backyard, full, lush, minimal dieback. You know, that we used to be able to count on things like fig and southern magnolia to really show some serious winter damage, but they're now overwintering. You know, we had less than 2 inches of snow and just a day or two of temperatures in the teens last winter. So, not to be gloom and doom. You know, things are going to be okay one way or another. I think the landscape is just going to continue to change, and we get to be here to witness it. So I guess I'll just start taking questions. Is that the protocol here, Jean? Is a question popped up?
Sure, we can do it that way. I mean, people can, probably the best thing is probably to enter them into the chat box. Does everyone know how to do that?
Yeah, I'm looking at a question from Virginia. And American hornbeam is typically, gets a little loose with what we call American hornbeam, but typically I call it Carpinus caroliniana. And I don't regard them as being in trouble, but there is an asterisk with that, Virginia. I'm describing my property, and it's actually a twin in the Wissahickon section. And lately I've been getting some domestic feedback from my wife, Jennifer, that we're overplanted and it's too shady. All things that can be worked out. But I happen to have I have the American hornbeam both as a street tree here on Rochelle Avenue, and then a second one all the way in the back. They're both growing really well. I got both of them from Philadelphia Green, from the Tree Tenders program, which I do help out with their plantings. You know, I work pretty closely with Mindy Maslin on that. So inevitably, there's going to be the bare root tree left over. And, you know, I am planted out. I'm more into vegetables now as the new plants. I have the asterisk or disclaimer on American hornbeam is I don't think it's going to be the tree that we can stick into the hot, dry minimal moisture street tree location. Mine has gotten a fair amount of TLC, and it doesn't sit in direct, neither of them sit in direct sun throughout the day. That being said, I think the big advantage for the hornbeams is they are in that elusive classification of tree that is not too big and not too small. And that is it's frustrating, but it's actually a very small list of trees that fit into that category. American hornbeam, European hornbeam, hop hornbeam, which is Australia virginiana, and then we get into the red buds and the dogwoods, and everything I just listed, of course, are natives. But beyond that, then we really have to think things through a little bit as far as what that small and medium-sized tree would be. Which brings me to something I did want to talk about, which is, you know, I'm sure everyone attending tonight can tell a story, and I made a point of not including any pictures. People want to say, oh, did you see the tree that fell over on McCallum Street? And it's like, you know, I don't want to romanticize it. I have this pretty intimate relationship with trees. So at some level, it's, you know, it's deeply distressing to see the urban forest kind of falling apart like it is. But it made me realize, and I was posing this question to Bob Gutowski the other day, it's so important to have these big canopy trees, but if they're going to pose a threat to person and property, then you know, where does that leave us in terms of the species that we recommend? And that takes us back to the American hornbeam, and I'm going to be talking about this in a minute. This is one of the happy stories. Yeah, if you have, you know, a half a dozen tulip poplars on the property, if you have the big white oak, if you have the sugar maple or the Norway maple, tree work is expensive. You know, we have a huge overhead. We pay a lot of money for insurance to have quality people. The business plan calls that you pay your top people top dollars so that they deliver a fantastic job. So I'll just go right to this picture. This is Metasequoia glyptostroboides. This is the dawn redwood. This is right in Chestnut Hill on Wheel Pump. And I'm sure these people are tired of me driving by periodically and taking pictures. But for one thing, speaking of derecho and heavy winds and flooding creek beds and low stream beds and stuff, there's a scientist in Florida, I believe actually recently retired, Dr. Ed Gilman, and he did a whole assessment, including setting up out in the field the giant orchard fans, and kind of replicated some hurricane force winds. And if you want to ask me which big tree to plant, the one I'm over recommending and over prescribing are these dawn redwoods. They came out at the top of the list of Dr. Gilman's work. You can see the buttressing, the root flare down at the base. Do you see them on all 5 trees, how they flare out so nicely in all directions? So thank you. Thanks, Leah. Doing a terrific job, really well anchored. And the wheel pump, as you may or may not know, is kind of on the edge of the Morris Arboretum with a pretty good northwestern orientation. So we all know, or at least I do observationally, it seems like a lot of these strong wind patterns come in west or northwest. these trees are laying right out there, fully exposed. And if you could maybe go back one, Leah, just that distant photo, you'll see up at the tops, it's a single stem. It's pyramidal, and it's also what we call a deciduous needle-bearing tree. So it's not like a spruce or a white pine or even a holly that's going to stay green throughout the winter months. The needles do shed. But the cool thing about this little house on Wheel Pump, and maybe could you go back to that one we were just looking at, is they've essentially got a monoculture here. They've got one species. And I've seen this on another location where people didn't even have turf. They just had this low maintenance landscape where the bed of needles falling off the metasequoia was the mulch and the weed control and the low impact landscape that did not have to be mowed or fertilized or aerated or anything like that. So I don't know if this was by design or if someone just got 5 free trees from Morris Arboretum as part of a plant giveaway, 25, 35 years ago. But go have a look at it sometime. It's a very impressive little ecosystem here.
Hal, can you see the question in the group chat from Don Campbell?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so Don is saying, I'm preparing to add a new tree to my property. I have mostly maples, 1 Zelkova, 1 black walnut, 1 oak, and 1 wild cherry. So one of the truths of this business, axioms, I guess, is to practice right tree, right location. So Don, I don't know your property. I think it's just, you want to take your time with it and research it as far as what are you looking for? Do you want another fruit-bearing tree? Do you need more shade? Do you want more summer color? Do you want more spring color? So those are kind of the first questions to ask yourself as you move into this selection process. There's some very cool trees, everything from extremely interesting and rare Japanese maples that are small and with a weeping habit, or even upright with very interesting coral colored bark. And there are trees that you have to work a little harder to find in terms of the Asian, the Chinese fringe tree is an extraordinary tree. I believe you can find that at Calabreros. Interesting exfoliating bark and a great show of color. Same with Paradia, Persian hornbeam. But everything I'm reciting right now, Don, is just because, I'm basically telling you some of my favorite trees. And I think I'm almost ready to say, without seeing it, I'll take a pass on trying to answer that, other than, ask yourself or ask me, tell me a little bit more in terms of, here he is, I want a large tree that will provide shade. Then I would recommend staying with a native. I'm not 100% native zealot. That continues to be a heavy-handed back and forth at the conferences. It gets actually quite emotional about natives versus imports. But I would go with a hackberry, or a superior species of American elm, which is Jefferson. I think Jefferson is basically the only elm to find, to plant, because unlike the Princeton elm, which is quickly, or not quickly, proving itself pretty problematic unless you can prune it every year for the first decade, Jefferson has a much better branching structure. Two very solid choices. Every time I see a hackberry, I really marvel at. And I notice, again, not to go into boring back history, but more and more I do favor these kind of, I don't want to call them working class trees, but just functional trees that are low disease, low insect issues, don't need to be fertilized, can handle dryness, can handle heavy rain, you know, and those are everything I just recommended in terms of the elm and the hackberry are very solid choices.
Very well. Yeah. Hal, among the oaks, do you have favorites or recommendations for things that would that are disease resistant and not problematic?
In the oaks, for the oaks? Yeah, I'm gonna make one point, and then hopefully if I go off topic, Jean, remind me. But one thing I'm starting to learn is the value of small trees. In fact, over my left shoulder, just as kind of a corny thing to bring in, that's actually a dogwood that I got from the National Arbor Day Foundation that's been sitting in a plastic pot in my backyard. And again, because I've been put on notice not to plant any more trees, I'm always looking for homes for it. All this to say, there's a place for small trees, and I am realizing that there are businesses that are doing pretty cool work with mailing you a tree in very fancy containers. They arrive bare root. But as I say all this, I also realize that Tree Philly and tree tenders are doing a great job getting small trees out to you, out to us as citizens. As far as oaks, man, I mean, I just love to see the white oak or the bur oak get used in a space that has the right amount of root zone and the right amount of aerial space up top. Both red oak and, both white oak and bur oak and chestnut oak are not showing bacterial leaf spore issues. So keep planting oaks, keep planting elms. The other oak that keeps popping up, well, no, that's an exaggeration. There's a handful of them around. I'm thinking of one in the Rydell neighborhood that I marvel at, is laurel oak. And so if I could pick any of those three, I'd be happy. Or the four, just to circle back: chestnut oak, white oak, bur oak, and laurel oak. And I believe laurel oak is one of those southern pioneer species that's moving in. Not moving in, you know, through acorns falling off of a truck, but you know, people have planted it on occasion and it's doing fine.
We have a question about deer protection from deer damage, how to protect small saplings from deer damage.
Yeah, and I think anymore, that just has to be part of a good planting job. I'm again, there are the tubes, 3-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch in diameter that you buy ready to use with the slit down the side. That is probably one aspect or one phase that'll work extremely well. The main thing we're trying to do is discourage the buck from rubbing his antlers on the trunk and nipping at foliage as a food source. Phase 2, along with the tube on the main trunk, is going to be setting up some staking material away so that a hungry deer cannot force its way in to feed. So that would mean chicken wire and steel or wood posts. But, you know, most things work extremely well. You know, you just want to install them in a sturdy fashion. And most importantly, you just want to install them. Don't pretend that the deer won't find your plant, because just when you think, oh, they're leaving it alone, you'll come out and, you know, find significant bark damage or heavy feeding, and it can be very discouraging.
Is there a season for that that antler damage? That's seasonal?
Is it seasonal?
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on that, but I do believe it's associated with them rubbing the velvety cover off their horns. And that's, you know, it's like, I guess, like scratching an itch. They need to get it done, and any rough surface is going to work. Are we finding deer pressure pretty significant in Chestnut Hill?
It depends where you live, I think.
Yeah.
Closer to the park, yes. Not so much in the blocks close to Germantown Avenue, for example.
Right. Okay. And do people see herds of significant size, or is it just the lone actor?
I see mostly single
Yeah.
deer.
Right. Okay. And has it spiked a little bit? Because I kind of felt like the browsing had tapered off, and maybe we don't even want to go into that culling conversation, but it did seem like some of my clients were feeling like some of the low level shrubs and ground covers were not being fed on as aggressively for a period of time, but it sounds like maybe the culling didn't take place, but we better not go into that.
Okay.
I realize it's controversial. I'm going to read Melissa's question then. We have 4 young trees between our sidewalk and the street. One of them, possibly a cherry, was planted 3 to 5 years ago, directly under the wire that brings power to our house from the power lines across the street. They were planted by the previous owner. Is it possible to dig it up and move it, or would it be more likely not to survive? Or would it be more likely not to survive a move to a different location? We have a ton of mature trees, so if this one had to go, we would probably be okay. Is there a best month to move it? And are we better off asking Pico to move the wires? I'm sorry to chuckle there. I think Pico will probably tell you have to hire your own electrician. And once again, you know, I have in my overplanted yard, I do have a hop horn beam, and now all my trees have a little backstory. This one was brought down from my in-laws' place in central New York, and you know, now it's taller than the house, but it is conflicting now with house service. And I know Pico's going to say, bring your own electrician in and reroute it. For Melissa, yeah, if you're thinking about transplanting, if it's still a spindly little, you know, 1 to 2 inch diameter, you know, that's almost like broomstick diameter, you could transplant it. I think typically I'd like to suggest that you have a gardening professional do it. because, you know, if you like the tree, if you want to see it successfully transplanted, which used to be done all the time, that digging and putting a burlap ball on it is quickly fading out. The short answer is I think it could be done. If you're feeling like you have a lot of trees already and you can't provide it the right location in terms of full sun, then maybe you do want to have it go away. And there's always Craigslist. Sometimes you can, you know, find a home for it that way. I know Craigslist doesn't like you to talk about your pets, but I think they'll let you give away your tree on Craigslist.
Do you see this question about yellowwood from Virginia?
I'm going to find it. Let's see.
It's the most recent question.
Can you read it to me?
Yes, Virginia Bryant. I asked about yellowwood, but think it got buried in the chat.
Oh,
we
good.
planted one to replace a huge sugar maple this year. Was that a good choice? We have a half-acre yard with good space for a large tree.
I think yellowwoods are great. They're very popular, or seem to be having their moment again. They used to be an older landscape tree that you'd see more of. The big caveat with yellowwoods is young tree pruning. They like to develop mediocre to poor stem attachments. By that I mean, you know, two limbs that are, if you can see the very descriptive, you know, the branches are that's included bark down there. So it's pruning while they're young. Any tree, you know, just touching them annually, 1 to 4 to 6 hand pruner cuts can save so many headaches. So other than that, in terms of species choice, yellowwoods are great. The bees like them. They put out a great fall color, you know, a deep buttery yellow, and they flower in incredible fashion as well. So happy to hear about a yellowwood getting planted, and plant a few of them.
I have a question about the aging of monocultures of street trees in our area. We have, for example, whole blocks that are London plane trees, or, I mean, that's a typical example, or a whole block of cherries or whatever, and they tend to be aging out in because our suburbs are you know, our neighborhoods that used to be suburbs of Philadelphia,
Right.
are the big build out was, you know, 100 to 120 years ago. So what do you do when, you know, your big sycamore fails and the rest of the trees on the street are still alive, but is it reasonable to try to perpetuate that monoculture, or do you go for a more diverse planting plan in the future?
Mm-hmm. I favor getting away from monoculture. I guess the consensus amongst the urban foresters is, it's a formula I always have trouble articulating, but basically, if you have 10 trees, hypothetically, oh man, I feel like I want to look it up. I understand that the London plane monoculture, you know, really worked, especially in the older Philadelphia neighborhoods, and there are a handful of those neighborhoods where the London plane still thrives. We've also seen London planes, even here in East Falls or across the creek from me, lose all their London planes systematically. Same with Frankfurt and Alney neighborhoods. And some of that was actually perpetuated by tree companies because they would prune on cool, wet days and move the canker stain disease from tree to tree. So if there was a block in Chestnut Hill and it had, 5 London planes on either side, I would be inclined to diversify. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, yes, you lose the aesthetic pleasantness of, repeated structures down the way, branching structures and bark and things like that. But I think the counter strategy is to plant trees that more or less pay homage to that London plane. In other words, you can still plant a tree that has a nice straight trunk, that has nice perpendicular branching, maybe mixes it up with bark type and things like that. But I don't think we want to replicate. I think too many communities throughout the nation have really felt the pain of losing every single tree on their block within a 5-year period. And it's actually still happening, like in communities in Michigan where ash got used to replace American elm, and then they subsequently all their ashes went to emerald ash borer.
We have a new question. Can a metasequoia with a 3/4 inch stem still be successfully moved?
I'm going to say yes. And that's just the simple answer to an online chat conversation. But 3/4 inch metasequoias are tough. But I think even at that, just for the sake of feeling good about moving it, have someone oversee the project or look at a very good YouTube. How could I forget just recommending look at it for a YouTube video, and I'm sure you'll have fine success. But good to hear that you have one. Yeah, I don't even think I mentioned when I was talking about metasequoia earlier that they are extremely fast growing on top of everything else. So, I hate to say it right now, it's kind of that, and it's tree very similar to it is bald cypress, which actually has a little bit more application as a street tree, a little bit tougher. But I have to be careful about saying metasequoia is a perfect tree, because even though it's like the ginkgo, a tree that's been around for thousands of years, it's not to say some pest could find it and find it a very desirable home for nesting and boring into and stuff like that. One talking point that I wanted to make sure, the seminar the other day from the University of Washington, there was a forester from British Columbia talking about, and I mentioned Philadelphia, tree tenders and tree Philly. They're both outstanding programs, and they're national models for what they get done. But this professor made the point that citizen arborists, that needs to continue. We need to grow that segment of the tree care community in our cities, via workshops and training, Morris Arboretum, Horticulture Society, wherever you can find it, because municipal budgets are going to get hammered. If we want to follow the city's ability to pick up recycling buckets, if we want to extend that into Philly Parks and Rec for tree care, and in so many ways that we're already there, some of these urban forestry problems are not going away based on the city being able to come in and solve street tree planting, tree pruning, tree removal, things like that. So it really is upon us as citizens to learn about trees and help out with the tree plantings. And the good news is it's great work. It's obviously I have a bias here in terms of being an arborist, but working with people on projects like these is extremely satisfying. And I just wanted to make that pitch that we, the citizen arborist community needs to continue to grow.
As a tree tender, I thank you for that pitch.
Oh yeah, thank you, Jean.
And we have, let's see, we're about 10 minutes to 9. The next two more questions. If you have a lot of trees and mature trees, how often should you get them checked by a tree service? There's a pitch for you.
Oh yeah. Couple points on that. An annual inspection is not unreasonable. Yeah, I would say an annual inspection, which can be just, making that phone call and say, hey, could you stop by and have a look around, and make sure, eliminate the hazards. It's always about eliminating the hazards. Is there a fungal fruiting body off the root flare? Is there a crack? By the way, quick side note, sever English ivy. Get rid of all the English ivy on your property, but sever it on your upright, on your trees, because we can't see the crack that may have developed on June 3rd when that derecho blew through, 3 or 4 neighborhoods and then continued to wreak havoc through Bucks, Montgomery, and through Jersey and stuff. There could be a crack up in that tree that is just not going to be noticeable. A lot of times, this, not switching into scare tactics, but ivy does obscure the crack on a trunk or on a limb. So sever it and stand back and watch it die. It'll fall out on its own. Annual inspection is good. The other thing I've begun to talk to clients about more and more is just to drop back to me as a junior arborist in, 1970 or something like that. It used to be the pruning specification was climb tree, prune dead branches, come back down. That was the extent of it. But Dr. Gilman, who I talked about earlier, who found these metasequoias to be such a great tree, also has written extensively about pruning. And the tree care industry does have professional specifications about how to prune and how not to prune, how to prune to encourage health versus over pruning to trigger stress and decline. And he uses a term which I'm kind of still playing with called preventative structural pruning. Basically, he's laid out some guidelines for how do you prune the tulip poplar that sways to and fro when the winds come up. How do you prune that to, not completely eliminate it as a hazardous tree, potential hazardous tree, but at least reduce the likelihood of it shedding out a limb. And I talk about yet one more tree in my backyard, which is the Norway maple we inherited when we moved in 30 plus years ago. It's an old tree that's on its way out, and about every 3 to 5 years in the winter, I'll have our guys stop by and just thin it by about 20%, and also look for limbs that are out of balance, outliers. I like that term, maybe kind of just like that overextended limb that needs to be reduced, not removed, but reduced by 20% in length. You know, take that 10-foot limb and reduce it by 2 to 3 feet. So it's a little stouter, a little stiffer, so that when the winds come up, it has much less moving back and forth and getting jerked around. And there are scientists that work on that, not a lot. I have seen presentations where they talk about weight load and the physics of how trees operate. And again, this metasequoia, I think, is proof positive. Same with the ginkgo. You know, they don't fall apart in the storms unless they uproot from saturated soils. So got off on a tangent there, sorry.
Okay, well, I think there's one more question, and maybe that should be the last topic, and if it can be the condensed version, which is, what do you recommend to do about the spotted lanternfly in 5 minutes?
Yeah, man. So I like to start my spotted, not that I give long spiels about it because I've been talking about it for almost 18 months straight now, but I don't see it as a tree killer. And Penn State backs that up. It's big. It's, some people find it attractive. It's slow moving. There's huge numbers of them. Basically, it's the perfect self-quarantining pest, right? You can look out the window and you can get up and walk away from your Zoom meeting and kill a dozen of them and feel like you've helped save the world. But I don't see it as a tree killer. And the other piece, and I hope I'm right, I'm reading between the lines when I hear Emily Swackhammer at Penn State talk about populations in like Coatesville, parts of Chester County, Carbon County, northern Bucks, where it may have peaked last year or 2 years ago. We're not getting those frenzied anecdotal stories about huge populations coating the parking lot at the King of Prussia Mall and stuff like that. So this may not be a pest. It might be like gypsy moth, you know, which had a good run and then faded out. And I'm just hopeful that that's kind of what we're up against here. They're easy to kill. I had kind of a come to Jesus moment yesterday over in the Stotesbury community because I was walking into a backyard, not a client, but there was a tree right next to the house, and there was a big, I can't remember the name of these big wasps. Anyway, it was dead. Very handsome, sizable. I think they emerge from the ground this time of year, and I'm just not remembering their name. But it was dead, and I thought, man, I wonder if that was a product that got used, because we are using the harder stuff for the quick kill and systemic impact. And again, you know, you don't have to, they talked, I've heard a couple of talks, one was a YouTube thing, on bee populations and the insect populations in general. And as an arborist, I have to be very careful about what I'm putting up on trees because I don't want to kill bees. And so am I spraying black walnuts right now with a product to kill spotted lanternfly that's systemic? Yes. But I rationalize that red maples, black walnuts, none of the deciduous trees are in flower now, or at least the ones that get spotted lanternfly. They're not in, so I feel like that is giving us a little bit of slack in terms of the bee populations not getting hit. Bees, honeybees tend to be low. They're really just looking for hydrangeas and other summer flowering shrubs right now. So.
I have found that there's a lot of information on the Penn State Extension website for people that want to dive deeper into this topic.
Yes, Penn State has done a great job as our state land grant college. They were early on to it. I can see that Cornell and University of Maryland refer arborist professionals to the Penn State website on spotted lanternfly.
So I think that it's exactly 9 o'clock. What do you think? Does anyone have a last minute desperate question?
I just wanted
can
to
close
say
out with
thank
one
you.
last tip too.
Yeah.
Good.
Is observationally one of the is water your tree. You know, we've had some nice precipitation, but if the next 4 to 6 weeks, if we go through, you know, we've all seen periods of cool, wet weather. It's been a beautiful day, a beautiful week weather-wise. If hot, humid weather returns, if you have a young tree or even somewhat a tree in that senior citizen category, get the soaker hoses out and get that critical root zone watered. If you've had a tree planted in the last couple of years, August is the killer month for young trees that have only been in the ground, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much, Hal, and you answered a lot of my questions. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
And like I say, keep planting and learn about trees and get involved is my, you know, closing message.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and good night, and stay tuned for our next event.